Good morning and welcome to Dawn Walk. I'm joined by Raef Johnson, our head of Woodlands, and we're going to be discovering the 12 trees of Christmas this morning. We're going to be looking into what associations with wildlife these trees have and generally just loving the trees.
Sounds good.
Raef, we're about to come into the mile pit here, and there is our first tree of Christmas. It's a beech tree. It's got great buttressing of its roots here, and these buttress roots, you can see, play a good host to quite a few different plants going on here. So from the hart's tongue fern to cyclamen, heterofolium because it's got an ivy-like leaf, and lots of these nooks and crannies with little mushrooms in there too.
There's a young yew there, grown up in the roots.
Very good. So it'll be, how long do you think until this one's like the large yews down on by the toads?
It's going to be a few hundred years, isn't it? they're pretty slow, the yews. And you can't forget the lichens and the mosses on the bark itself.
And now those aren't just incredibly pretty and give a sense of fairy life to it, but they're very useful to all sorts of other tiny organisms that live on that.
An ecosystem in itself, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And the one animal that we've chosen for here is actually something that lives in and around the buttress roots and in and around this leaf litter, and it's a pygmy shrew. So the pygmy shrew is no bigger than really one digit on your thumb.
Tiny, aren't they? Yeah. Not that I've ever seen one. I'd love to, but
I think they're quite elusive.
They are, yeah.
So we haven't seen any pygmy shrews, but it's not just pygmy shrews that rely on the beech tree, is it, Raef? There's the beech tree has a great habitat at its base, and we see with those mosses and lichens, but also it provides a lot of beech nuts, which are eaten by loads of birds and small mammals, and some of even the bigger mammals. I think deer are quite keen on beech nuts too. Although I don't think you'll want deer in with your newly planted trees, will you?
Ideally not, but they are part of the woodland ecosystem in the right amount of numbers. So we wouldn't want them completely excluded. And you're right, the beech mast is an amazing food source, and especially in the mast years, it always amazes me how much they produce. Just carpets of beech mast.
So that's interesting. So a mast year, so they have, are they almost biennial on that, or just so that one year they'll produce a lot of nuts and another year that they won't? Is that the thing, or?
There doesn't seem to be a set period. It can be 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and as far as I've read and know, there doesn't seem to be a definitive reason for why they do it. The best reason I've heard is to increase the chances of propagation of younger trees by providing a glut of seed in 1 year, too much for the population of birds and animals that eat them, to eat them all, so then there's more chance of them growing on, and then in the following years they produce less or a normal amount, and then the animals get used to that. So they sort of bumper crop 1 year, there's almost too much for them to eat, so then more beech grow on.
That sounds pretty logical to me. Quite similar if you look at a lot of nature when it has that sort of explosion of young offspring or eggs, is to get around that predation by other things, right? Well, Raef, difficult to beat a morning like this, really. It is chilly, but it's lovely and clear.
It's beautiful.
And we're looking out across there to Alfred's Tower, and this brings us on to our second enchanted tree. And this is a controversial choice. It's a sycamore.
it does divide opinion. It does divide opinion, and you can understand why. It really grows very quickly, but I think when it gets to an age like this, it really changes. From that young, smooth-barked tree you find across woodland, almost growing like a weed, to these old ones. I think they really change.
They've got this amazing peeling bark, as you say. Later on, they develop this peeling bark, which actually is a habitat within itself. So you can see that these sorts of cracks, these fissures here, actually provide good shelter for overwintering insects.
Yeah, perfect.
And I see the tree creeper and the nuthatch marching up and down this thing, scuttling up and down it, winkling out insects from it. So it's not all bad with a sycamore, is it?
No. And in recent years, with ash dieback, it's taken a real turn in opinion, because with the loss of ash, because of ash dieback, we're looking for replacements in our woodland. And one of the best things about ash, amongst lots of things, is the abundance of lichens that grow on its bark, and that's because of the pH of the bark. And it's found that sycamore is one of the few trees with a similar pH, so can cultivate a similar community of lichens. So in recent years, it's become a possible replacement for ash in our woodlands because it provides similar benefits and it propagates itself just as easily as ash does.
Fascinating. So Raef, have you found trees that have excited you hugely here on the estate since you started?
The old oak in the deer park is pretty special. There's some beautiful ash trees actually, some nice old pollarded ash trees in old hedgerows that have really impressed me, and lots of nice pines. I do love a conifer. I'm a big fan of conifers, and there's some great Scots pines on the estate, as well as a few other pines up in the Pine Avenue.
The yew trees there's some really lovely yew trees here. Not just in terms of their size, but some of them have got just wonderful forms.
They ooze character, yews,
really
don't they?
do.
They really do.
They do. That's a good way of putting it. So one of my favourite trees, which isn't on our trail because it's not really in the gardens of the woodland, but is the sweet chestnut that's down by Avalon, our farm.
Yeah.
Which is, we had bosky trees in last year, and they aged it at 447 years old.
Wow. Yeah,
which is really impressive.
Yeah, that is impressive. Particularly on old trees like that, veteran trees, because as you probably know, they grow squatter and more bulbous. So they lose their height, but they sort of go lower and broader. So they put on girth as they grow older, rather than height.
And what's the process? Why do old trees, be they sweet chestnuts or oaks, why do the oldest trees tend to be squatter, more bulbous, not have the length, the breadth of their branches? They look like old, sometimes quite old gnarled barrels rather than big trees. Why does that happen to the trees?
Well, it's preservation really. So they want to stay alive. They want to keep going, and one way of doing that is to reduce its size, the chance of it being blown over in a strong wind, less leverage, but also to make less demand on their resources. If they can retrench or reduce their size, it's less resource, less energy to pump all those nutrients and up to branches that are far up and far out. So reducing in size, it's a bit less demand on decreasing energy, and a way of sustaining themselves into really old age.
Well, we're now into the parabola where we're not going to find extremely old trees in here, but we will find apple trees. And of course, the parabola is our collection of dessert apples. So this tree actually is a French cultivar, and it's been trained in this double helix way. Now, apple trees tend not to be the very old, long-lived trees, do they? They're quite young-lived trees, apple trees. On the whole, apple trees often don't live much longer than about 100 or 150 years old.
No, certainly not compared to the oaks and the sweet chestnuts that you find out in old parklands. But even in those 100 years, they're really valuable when they do get old. Again, as a habitat, and a really unique habitat. The old orchards of areas like this, of Somerset, provide some fantastic habitat that other woodlands, other trees don't provide. You know, old orchards are really, really fantastic, and you can get some of those old veteran tree features relatively quickly because they have a shorter life.
Mm-hmm.
They can grow those features quicker than an old oak or an old sweet chestnut. So old apples are really, really special.
Well, this tree, the animal that we have chosen as our associated animal for tree number 3 is the magpie duck. And anybody who's familiar with the parabola will be very familiar with our black and white ducks that come around, hoover up the apples as a bit of a dessert after hoovering up the slugs in here. So we head out at the bottom of the parabola, so the south wall, and I can already spot tree number 4 here. So an exotic tree, Raef. This is Cercidophyllum. Cercidophyllum, otherwise known as Katsura, is from Japan, from Korea. That's its native range. And a lot of people know it as the caramel tree.
Yeah.
Because of course in autumn, its little round leaves here, as they actually change and go brown, they give off a smell of burning sugar, don't they?
They do.
I love the folk stories and the folklore associated with trees. These old folk stories, these old fairy tales associated with the trees. Yeah. I think in many ways it brings that character of the tree alive so much, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think so, and I think there is that strong link, you know, humans and trees. You know, generally the longevity of how long the tree will live compared to perennial plants. It's the life that they'll lead, and even in some of the names that they use for trees, you know, limbs, you know, palmate leaves, and it's there's a definite human tree link there, isn't there?
Absolutely. Well, we love to do that as humans, don't we? We love to anthropomorphize. We love to find some kind of common way of associating features. I mean, as you say there, the palmate leaf. How better to describe something to someone than saying, well, it looks like something that's attached to you.
Yeah.
As we're walking up, we've got this brown these marcent leaves left on the hornbeam. Hornbeam acts as a really good winter hedge, doesn't it? Because it has that property of holding on to the leaves when it's in a hedge form, rather like a beech.
Yeah. No, it's great for it, and yeah, nice alternative to the beech.
So, Raef, tree number 5. One of the oldest residents in the formal gardens, and it's a yew. Great
trees. I think they take age really well. They look like old trees, don't they? They're so characterful, gnarly. The forms that they take, they're just beautiful.
And this looks like the most wonderful climbing frame here.
Yeah, you could get lost out there, couldn't you?
And as you say, so characterful. So every part of the tree is poisonous, save for a funny berry-like aril.
Yeah.
The red, fleshy, sticky, very sweet sort of fruit that is produced. And that's the only bit that we could eat as humans.
Yeah. Quite a risk though, eating it, isn't it? With that seed inside.
That seed inside. You don't want to swallow that.
No.
And it's interesting then that they are researching an anti-cancer drug from this. I think it's called, it's to do with the scientific name.
Taxol?
Yeah, Taxol is the name of the compound, the drug that they're looking at.
So, yeah, I see. And trees have historically provided us with lots of cures and medicines and aspirin from willow derivatives. It's and endless almost.
So do you think really that we shouldn't be forgetting that connection that we've had with the trees, not just in stories and our identity within the landscape, but also for very practical, useful, medicinal properties that come from these trees? Do you think that perhaps we could stop moving so quickly and we could start to look back at what these trees provided us before we got too sophisticated?
Oh, for sure. I think we'd be foolish if we didn't. The Amazon rainforest gets called the sort of medicine cabinet because of all the potential medicines that come from that habitat, and even domestically, in the yew, in the willow, it's there are medicines to be found, and I think we would be foolish not to maintain those links, for sure. Yeah, every tree has its place and provides something for someone or something. Try not to get got. You know the way. You know the route.
So Raef, we're just about to come in and meet tree number 6 on the Enchanted Trail. And tree number 6 is actually an old tree, but a very new addition to the garden. And that's because it's in our newly opened up, not even, I think just a month old now, is our bonsai garden, which has our very talented gardener, Maiko. Good morning, Maiko.
Morning.
We've got a Corsican pine here as tree number 6, otherwise known as a black pine. And it is one of the key focal points in the bonsai garden. Well, the animal associated with this is actually a gardener. And why is that? Well, because bonsai, as much as a black pine, a large black pine would support various different bird life and insect life, bonsai really is a curiously human thing to do, isn't it? Well, the sun is up now, Raef, and we've got more detailing going on. Now, the stones that we've used here, this amazing golden, bright honey colour, this is actually a local stone. We like to call it Carey stone, and look at the fossils that you find in it.
I didn't know that was there.
Really cool fossils. So this stone was actually laid down approximately 160 million years ago when Somerset was a warm, shallow tropical sea. And being a warm, shallow tropical sea, it was teeming with tiny little sea creatures. And it was subject to tremendous hurricanes and typhoons, which would whip the water up into a fury, smash the sea creatures together. The sea creatures would create, their shells would fracture, and the fractured shells would create a sand and fall to the seabed, and over many millions of years would create this Carey stone, which is so sort of characteristic of this area.
It's warm, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a warm stone, which is good on a day like today.
So we're now entering what will be known as the Lost Garden when it's another part of the garden that we're developing. And the story behind that is what happens to these gardens after the First World War. when many of the young gardeners go off to war and don't come back. And the gardens then sort of fall into a period of neglect. And you've got this mixture of exotics and natives and how they begin to grow up and around each other for decades. We've got one almost exotic here, and this is tree number 7. This is the hollyoak or the holm oak. And this comes from the continent, but it's been in the country for centuries. So Raef, our associated animal for tree number 7 on the Enchanted Trail is the jay. The jay is a very intelligent bird. There are studies going on now at Cambridge University to see just how far they can get this bird to mimic humans, and they've got quite a repertoire. And it's been also shown to be a problem solver, and it loves acorns. In fact, its species name means of the acorn. So they go and plant a lot of the acorns. They hide a lot of the acorns.
Prolific, in fact. 6,000 acorns a year, or thereabouts, planted by the jay, and lots of other wildlife do a very similar job, like the blackbird that you were mentioning before, eating those yew berries, passes through them. They take the nutrition from the berry, the sugars, and then the seed, which is toxic, happily passes out, and hopefully another yew tree grows on. So yeah, lots of examples of where wildlife are propagating new trees through eating nuts and berries and across the woodland.
Almost as if it was organised by the tree.
Almost.
So Raef, we're about to come up onto an ent. And all we can see of the ent are his legs. Now this is Beechbone, and Beechbone stands almost sentinel over the trees of the Belvedere here. Being an ent, he's a tree shepherd, not unlike yourself, Raef. And he's amazingly smooth legs with not any branching going on up it. Isn't that amazing?
It's a great tree. It really is a great tree.
And here's his other leg here.
I think on this one, there's probably been a bit of human pruning of some of the branches overhanging the path, perhaps. But then on this one over here, probably a bit more natural pruning. So beech casts really heavy shade, doesn't it? Really, really heavy. So not only does that mean that competition can't get in underneath, but it means it also shades out its own lower branches. So a bit of natural pruning as well as the human pruning on the one behind us there.
And the animal that we have associated with this ent, for in this part, is the hedgehog. Well, the hedgehog loves in the winter to make his nest actually around the fallen dry leaf litter, and beech makes a really good one because it tends not to get very wet. So the leaves take quite a while before they absorb in much of the water. So rather like a holly leaf and rather like some others, this will remain quite dry even on a wet floor, and that makes for a good little rustling bed for the hedgehog. Also, for the previous years that the leaves do begin to break down and they do begin to make a nice leaf litter, you'll find a lot of earthworms and woodlice and beetles in there, which the hedgehog loves to gorge itself on. So this makes a good habitat for the hedgehogs around here. And who doesn't like a hedgehog?
Quite.
So that's Beechbone the ent, who looks over the trees. Well, this has got to be the Council of Elves, doesn't it? I mean, look at this for a chamber for them getting together and discussing the affairs of Middle Earth.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
Really amazing. What you can do with these stumps. But it's not just the animals that these trees have an association with. Fungi is a large kingdom which has a well-recorded association with the trees. We can see from mycorrhizal fungi, which join the trees together in a wood wide web, to fungi that lives on the Deadwood, like these King Alfred's cakes, which has been used by Neolithic man to take fire from one site to another.
When you break them apart, they almost look like charcoal, don't they?
Yeah.
I think it's sort of got the same colour and texture.
So you and the team are working on charcoal at the moment, Raef.
Yeah. The team have been doing quite a few charcoal burns in the last couple of weeks. Up in the woodland, it's a nice winter job. Works well. We're using woodland products and producing another product in a nice, native timber charcoal.
So someone's been scuffling around in here. This, I suspect, is badger.
Yeah. It's looks like it. They're amazingly strong at snuffling about, aren't they?
Yeah.
Some of the soil they can move, and the damage they can do to lawns as well. It's quite incredible. But then I suppose they need to be good diggers, good snufflers to make their sets and seek out those worms and invertebrates underground.
And as you say, they have to dig quite deep, extensive sets, but they do pass them on, don't they, from generation to generation. In fact, you can have tens of generations who inherit the same set from one to another.
Yeah. No, it's a nice thought, really, isn't it? It's sort of a big family home.
Yeah, absolutely. So this part we call the rookery. It was originally a tree nursery. We know that from the original maps. But as the young, what was called little nursery and then great nursery, and on the maps where you see nursery, quite a few decades later, nursery is replaced with rookery.
Okay.
And so that's where these stands of wood, I imagine that they had grants like they do now for planting up for timber nurseries for the Navy or for whatever reason. And if you let that timber go over, you didn't harvest it, and it wasn't then useful to the shipbuilders, well, you would then have a rookery, a stand of what was once a planted by the hand of man, has now in many ways been reclaimed by nature. And this is what we have here at the moment.
Yeah. So now we're left with an overstory of ash and sycamore. We've got some yews over there. There's even a few odd elms in here, as well as an understory of holly and hazel and elder, amongst others.
So Raef, we spoke about lots of the properties of trees and their stories. Well, trees aren't always just what they seem. Sometimes they're a gateway to another world. This one here, I have it on good authority from a fellow called Robin Goodfellow, and he says that this is a gateway to a tunnel that takes you into the fairy kingdom of Oberon and Titania, which is underneath the snail mound over there. So approach carefully. Tell us what processes are in action here.
It's aside from the magical processes, it's you can see the trees starting to hollow out from the middle, and that's an entirely natural and brilliant process of nutrient cycling. So again, like we were talking about before, with those old trees wanting to grow on and stay alive for as long as possible, this is another way of how they can do that. So they hollow out from the middle, although all that rotten wood drops down into the roots, and it feeds itself to keep itself going for even longer. And in actual fact, a hollow tree can maintain a lot of strength, even completely hollow. You know, a tube is often just as strong, if not stronger, than a solid tree.
Then the other life with which you speak about are made up of other organisms, fungi and microorganisms, which are rotting out the centre of that tree.
Yeah.
And creating an ecosystem within itself.
Yeah, and often, in many cases, a really unique ecosystem. You can get saprophytic invertebrates that feed specifically on Deadwood, and some of those invertebrates can be unique to particular trees and particular Deadwood, and that is their entire world. That is their ecosystem. That one tree, that bit of Deadwood. So a really, really special habitat, and one that we're really fortunate to have a lot of in England, and particularly on these old estates where trees can grow on to old ages, to become veterans, to become ancients. We've got a lot of that really special habitat, really rare habitat, in fact. So again, at the top of the tree, as well as at the base, there's more Deadwood and there's more damage. But even from that damage, we've got new growth coming. So lime is another great coppicing species, like the hazel or the sweet chestnut. And where that top's broken out, it's regrowing from that outside edge, from that cambium, and growing up. So you've got the nice new silvery stems, and then the older, darker, more fissured bark underneath, and then the dark chestnut Deadwood in the centre. So all sorts going on in this tree. Absolutely fascinating. I love an old spattered tree like this.
A good woodland is about good layering, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
From your top canopy to your mid canopy to what's on the ground. When that's in balance, you provide a habitat for countless species, from microscopic organisms right the way up to giant beech trees.
Yeah. I mean, a good healthy woodland hopefully provides as many different habitats as possible, and you get that from, yes, like you said, you're having different heights, different layers of tree, from over canopy to mid-story to shrub layer with your hazels and your spindles, and right down to the ground level and the herb layer. And if you can maintain all those different layers, those levels throughout a woodland, you're going to attract lots more wildlife, and those layers can cycle through as well. You can have a big canopy layer, and then you'll have a storm, and that'll blow over, and then that'll become your new herb layer, your new shrub layer eventually. So woodlands are a healthy woodland should be an ever-evolving ecosystem, not just one that's in stasis and looks the same all the time.
Well, Raef, we're about to come to, it's not really a tree, it's a tree feature, and it's the hazel tunnel here. So this was planted up a couple of years ago, and the idea really is, well, it's sort of a coppiced tunnel, isn't it? What's coppicing all about?
So coppicing as a process is something that's been done in Britain for a very long time, for a very long time indeed. And we've got lots of species native to Britain that coppice really well. One of them being the hazel, others being alder, willow, and it's where you cut a tree down, because eventually these would grow on into trees, as with the alder and the willow. And you cut it down almost to the ground, and it will regrow from those cuts, and regrow with more stems than there was previously. So if there was one originally, you might come back the following year and have 3 more stems or 5 more stems, and you can keep that process going almost endlessly, and in fact it can increase the length of life of a tree. Some of our oldest trees in Britain and across Europe are either coppiced or pollarded, which is basically a form of coppicing, but further up the tree, leaving a trunk or a bole, and then regrowing from there.
So the coppicing provides us with building materials and straight poles, but it also provides us with a habitat for lots of different birds, and that most cutest of the little mammals, the hazel dormouse.
Yeah, yeah.
So partly having this tunnel is a design feature, but also it's providing habitat, increasing the natural range of the hazel dormouse.
Yeah. So as its name suggests, it loves the hazel. There's the hazel dormouse, and it likes that connecting canopy that hazel, particularly coppice, can provide. So they can stay off the ground, away from more predators on the ground, and they can just go from tree to tree. And you'll often find their nest in that coppice stool. So when you cut it to the ground, you often get right in the centre. You'll get a really lovely nest of leaves and mosses, and they'll nest down there for the winter, right in that coppice stool. So something created by man, providing a home for the hazel dormouse.
Great. For what, it's quite nice that we actually do look after things rather than constantly chopping them down.
Yeah, and in Britain we've had such a long history of working in our woodlands. The hand of man has been in British woodlands for so long that there's a link between the wildlife and the action of man. It's not always a bad thing, and can often enhance wildlife.
So Raef, tree number 11, which actually isn't a living tree in the truest sense of the form, but it does provide a lot of life. So this is a dead beech trunk, and it has this extensive network of ivy growing up it, which will then in turn support a lot of life. Can you tell us a little bit about why you leave large chunks of tree around rather than chopping them all down?
Yes, well, deadwood in all its forms, be that standing deadwood, be that fallen deadwood on the ground, be that branches or whole trunks of trees like this, are crucial to a healthy woodland ecosystem. Deadwood habitat in itself is fascinating in the level of insects, fungi, lichens that it supports, as well as bigger animals in those hollows of big old dead trees like this. You'll have birds nesting, you'll have squirrels, you'll have even bigger animals down in big hollows in the roots, badgers and hedgehogs that we've mentioned already today, and particularly under flaking bark and in hollows, bats.
So here we've got it on good authority that we've got long-eared bats in here. So
yeah.
rather fun-looking bat. And we've also got what was once a flowering ivy, but now it's got turning into ivy berries. And ivy is a really useful foraging plant for the bees late on into October, which is where they tend to flower into. So a really useful late flowerer. Now, ivy, is that friend or foe to you then, Raef, in the woods?
It's most definitely friend. It's most definitely friend. It doesn't feed off the tree. It uses it as a climbing frame, so it can photosynthesize. Sometimes it can increase the sale value of a tree. So that's not the financial value that it can be sold at, but that's the sale value in how much the wind hits it. Increases that area that can be hit by the wind, especially in the winter, as it maintains its leaves. It can have that effect, but really it's an important part of woodlands, and for many of the features you've pointed out already, as well as many others.
Well, Raef, we're back to the beginning, but we still have one more tree to tick off our list, and this tree is our Christmas tree. So it's the large Christmas tree. It's the 12th tree of Christmas. It's got to be the robin. It is redbreast, and that's who flits about in here. And their bark, I hear, is also can become very, very thick indeed.
Yeah. Super thick and really fibrous. And again, a trait of those West Coast conifers, the same as the Douglas fir and coach redwood, that thick fibrous bark is part of their natural habit of surviving forest fires. So a thick dense bark, which is actually fireproof, sees them through the forest fires, and then they set seed. They're able to tell that the forest fires have been through, drop loads of seed onto a nice cleared but also fertilised forest floor to increase the chances of their young growing on. So absolutely fantastic trees, and that thick bark as well really protects from lots of insect pests as well. And there's not a lot that'll see a giant redwood out. Other than a strong wind, there's not many pests or diseases that affect it, and they're incredibly long lived as well, thousands of years.
Raef, thank you for taking us around the 12 trees of Christmas. It's been very enjoyable, if a little cold.
That's all right, my pleasure. And I've heard there's a prize.
There is.
Let's go and get it.
All right, rocky road.